The 2000 Arnold Classic took place from February 25th to 27th, 2000, in Columbus, Ohio, during the already legendary Arnold Schwarzenegger Fitness Weekend. At that point, this wasn't just another stop on the pro circuit. It was the second biggest show in bodybuilding, right behind the Mr. Olympia. Stepping on that stage meant you were competing at the absolute highest level the sport had to offer. Bodybuilding in the year 2000 was brutally competitive. The 1990s had pushed the physical standard to a whole new level, blending size, razor-sharp conditioning, and aesthetics like never before. The Arnold Classic captured that exact transition moment. It brought together athletes who represented different philosophies of the ideal physique, all trying to prove who truly defined that era. And it wasn't just intense on stage. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was heavy. There was tension, quiet strategy, last-minute adjustments, and psychological warfare happening far from the lights. Conversations were low and calculated. Every move mattered. That weekend turned into a mental battle long before the judges ever compared poses. When the final moment came, all that built-up pressure exploded into one defining instant. The lights got brighter. The crowd went silent. The stage became the center of the bodybuilding world. Weeks, and for some, years, of preparation were about to be judged in a matter of minutes. Then the final result was announced, and the name that echoed through the Veterans Memorial Center was Flex Wheeler. With that win, he secured his fourth Arnold Classic title, an unprecedented achievement at the time, one that permanently etched his name into the competition's history. That title cemented Flex as the ultimate symbol of aesthetics in professional bodybuilding. His physique wasn't just big. It was balanced, symmetrical, clean, and almost unreal in proportion. A tight waist, flowing lines, full muscle bellies. Everything looked sculpted with surgical precision. Plenty of athletes were massive. Very few were complete. That night, Wheeler looked untouchable. On top of the main trophy, Flex also received the most muscular award, presented by Arnold Schwarzenegger himself. That moment carried serious weight. Being recognized by Arnold, arguably the greatest icon the sport has ever seen, placed Wheeler in a category reserved for only a handful of names across decades. The victory came with a $100,000 check, a huge amount at the time, donated by Joe Weider. Adjusted for inflation, that would be roughly equivalent to around $180,000 to $190,000 today, a serious payday by any standard. But that night wasn't built in a single announcement. What fans saw on stage was the final chapter of a rivalry that had already started heating up days earlier. To really understand the magnitude of that win, you have to go back just 1 week. The event had essentially turned into a direct showdown between two men who embodied peak aesthetics in bodybuilding, Flex Wheeler and Chris Cormier. From the moment the lineup was announced, it was obvious this wouldn't come down to minor details. It was going to be about style, confidence, and mental strength. The audience knew they were about to witness something special. The tension skyrocketed because just 1 week earlier, Cormier had defeated Wheeler at the Ironman Pro Invitational. That one snapped Flex's dominant streak at that show and sent shockwaves through the pro scene. Suddenly, the automatic favorite walked into the Arnold under maximum pressure, while Cormier came in riding a wave of momentum and confidence. That dynamic turned the Arnold Classic into an immediate rematch, something rare in professional bodybuilding. There was no time for excuses, no long rebuilding phase, no gradual tweaks. It was all or nothing, and it had to happen fast. What made it even more fascinating was that despite the rivalry, Flex Wheeler and Chris Cormier trained together in the days between the Ironman and the Arnold. Two title favorites, sharing the same gym space, watching each other closely, making subtle adjustments in silence. It was an intense mix of competitiveness, mutual respect, and absolute belief in their own physiques. When the final results were announced, sportsmanship took center stage. Chris Cormier was the first to walk over and embrace Flex Wheeler on stage. That moment became one of the most iconic images of the event. A rivalry that had fueled one of the most anticipated Arnold Classics in history ended not with bitterness, but with respect and greatness in front of the world. But behind that embrace, there was something even more remarkable happening. That victory wasn't built in a single night under the stage lights. It had started days earlier, far away from the spotlight. And that's where one of the most fascinating parts of this story begins. One of the most impressive aspects of that event was Flex Wheeler's ability to completely transform his physique in what felt like an almost impossible time frame. After losing at the Ironman Pro, he had just 7 days to reinvent himself. 1 week, no long prep, no room for error. The foundation of that transformation wasn't about drastic changes, it was about precision. Flex was known for understanding his body at a level very few athletes ever reach. His carbohydrate manipulation was almost surgical. He used minimal amounts, just enough to restore muscle fullness without sacrificing conditioning. A small miscalculation could have blurred his physique or flattened him out completely. Every move was calculated. In the final days leading up to the stage, the focus shifted to dialing in peak conditioning. Reducing water retention brought that look fans describe as paper-thin. Full muscles, dry skin, deep separations. The kind of sharpness that makes a physique stand out even among the best in the world. It wasn't just impressive, it was striking. What made it even more powerful was that the transformation wasn't only physical, it was mental. After losing a major competition, many athletes struggle with confidence. Flex did the opposite. He turned that loss into fuel. His focus sharpened. His attention to detail intensified. The setback became motivation. And that combination, emotional control and strategic precision, is exactly what showed up on stage just days later. What the audience saw wasn't simply a rebound performance. It was the most refined, complete version of Flex Wheeler. The physique he presented at the 2000 Arnold Classic is often described as the gold standard of aesthetics in bodybuilding. Weighing in at around 109 kilograms on stage, that's roughly 240 pounds, Wheeler looked even more dramatic because of the visual contrast. His extremely tight waist created the illusion of greater width and depth, making his lats, shoulders, and legs look even more dominant. His muscle lines flowed naturally, balanced, and symmetrical, without obvious weak points. For many fans, that was the blueprint of what a bodybuilder should look like. Years later, some analyses suggested that Wheeler may have had a rare myostatin deficiency, a genetic condition that reduces the natural limitation on muscle growth. That could help explain how he maintained such dense muscle mass while staying incredibly lean, something that seemed to defy normal physiological limits. Whether scientifically confirmed or not, the visual impact was undeniable. But what very few people knew at the time was that while the crowd was celebrating the peak of a near-perfect physique, a silent battle was beginning behind the scenes. On stage, he looked dominant and unstoppable. Off stage, reality was starting to tell a different story. Shortly after reaching that peak at the 2000 Arnold Classic, Flex Wheeler's career took an unexpected and quiet turn. He was diagnosed with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a serious hereditary kidney disease that progressively damages kidney function. The news came as a shock, especially because it followed what many consider the greatest moment of his professional life. Without most fans realizing it at the time, the 2000 Arnold Classic ended up being Flex Wheeler's final professional victory. He continued competing at a high level, but something had changed. His body, which once responded almost perfectly to extreme contest prep, began showing limitations. Off-stage, the level of care and medical monitoring increased dramatically. Later that same year, Wheeler stepped on the Mr. Olympia stage and earned a respectable third-place finish. For most athletes, that would be a career highlight. For Flex, it quietly marked the beginning of a more challenging chapter. The realization that his body would no longer tolerate the extremes that once carried him to the top. As the years passed, the disease progressed aggressively. His kidney complications became more severe, eventually requiring intensive treatment and, later on, a kidney transplant. That silent condition slowly brought an early end to one of the most talented and aesthetically gifted careers in bodybuilding history. That goodbye didn't come with a dramatic announcement or one last symbolic walk across the stage. There was no grand farewell, no orchestrated final pose under the lights. It happened quietly, almost invisibly to the wider audience. No final scene, no curtain call, just the kind of silence that follows battles fought far away from the spotlight. And maybe that's exactly what makes that night even more meaningful. Because without knowing what the future had in store, that moment ended up sealing Flex Wheeler's legacy with something very few athletes in history ever received. Backstage, Arnold Schwarzenegger personally approached Flex Wheeler and said something that would echo through bodybuilding history. "You're the best bodybuilder I've ever seen." This wasn't casual praise. It wasn't hype. It was direct, personal, and definitive, almost like history itself placing a golden exclamation point at the end of a legendary chapter. Those words carried enormous weight. Arnold wasn't just the host of the event. He was a competitor who shared the stage with some of the greatest legends the sport has ever seen. Sergio Oliva, Frank Zane, and Lou Ferrigno were all part of his era. When someone with that resume makes a statement like that, it instantly becomes historical. But the 2000 Arnold Classic wasn't defined by individual recognition alone. The entire event felt symbolic, almost like it was honoring not just the present, but the entire legacy of bodybuilding. That same weekend marked another historic first. It was the debut of the Arnold Lifetime Achievement Award, created to recognize contributions that went far beyond trophies or physiques. The first recipient was Joe Weider, widely known as the father of modern bodybuilding. He helped structure the sport as we know it today, building federations, launching magazines, organizing competitions, and giving global exposure to athletes who otherwise would have remained unknown outside their home countries. Seeing Arnold present that award to Weider was powerful. On one side, the man who built the foundation of the sport behind the scenes. On the other, the athlete who became its most recognizable symbol on stage. It was a perfect intersection, the architect and the icon. But the 2000 Arnold Classic wasn't just about symbolism and tributes. At its core, it was still about competition, and what a lineup it had. That year featured one of the deepest, most competitive rosters the event had ever seen up to that point. When the dust settled and the judges made their final call, it was clear the show had delivered at the highest level. Flex Wheeler took first place, completing a near-perfect night. Right behind him was Chris Cormier, confirming that the event truly came down to a two-man showdown. In third came Kevin Levrone, bringing his signature charisma and competitive edge that always fired up the crowd. Dennis James secured fourth place with sheer size and strong stage presence, followed by Dexter Jackson, who at that time was still emerging as a rising star. Sixth place went to Gunter Schleierkamp, whose massive frame stood out immediately. At his peak, he was pushing close to 290 pounds in the off-season, roughly 132 kilograms, though he came in lighter and sharper for competition. Rounding out the top 10 were Darren Charles, Jason Arntz, JD Dewodu, and Craig Titus, all delivering solid performances on one of the most demanding stages in the sport. The night closed with an electrifying pose-down. Led by Levrone, Cormier, and Schleierkamp, the competitors turned the stage into pure spectacle. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, non-stop energy. It was obvious to everyone watching. This wasn't just another Arnold Classic. That same edition also marked a turning point for women's bodybuilding. For the first time, the Ms. International competition was officially divided into lightweight and heavyweight classes, an important change aimed at making judging fairer and recognizing different physique styles within the division. It was another sign that the sport was evolving, even as it honored its history. In the heavyweight division, the favorite delivered exactly what everyone expected. Vicky Gates stepped on stage with a dominant physique, blending size, muscle density, and sharp conditioning at a level that clearly separated her from the rest of the field. Her experience showed in every comparison. The muscle maturity, the control, the confidence. There was very little room for debate. She didn't just win her class. She went on to claim the overall title, solidifying her position as one of the leading female bodybuilders of that era. Her performance reinforced the image of a complete athlete, someone who combined strength, stage presence, and extreme conditioning into one powerful package. In the lightweight division, the spotlight belonged to Brenda Raganot. With a more compact frame, outstanding symmetry, and crisp conditioning, she controlled her category with authority. Her physique stood out for its balance and clean lines, flowing naturally from pose to pose. It wasn't about sheer size, it was about precision and proportion. The weekend also delivered one of its most elegant and electrifying moments during the Fitness International competition. In a lineup packed with high-level routines, Kelly Ryan rose above the field and captured the title, leaving a lasting mark on that historic edition of the event. Kelly stood out early with a rare combination of balance, femininity, and athletic conditioning. Her physique displayed harmonious proportions, just the right level of definition, and a stage presence that radiated confidence. It wasn't just about strength or aesthetics, it was about total body control. When it came to the gymnastics routines, she raised the bar even higher. Clean, precise movements demonstrated not only physical preparation but also timing, rhythm, and flow. Every transition felt intentional. Every landing was sharp. She kept the audience locked in from start to finish. The crowd's reaction said it all. You could feel that something special was unfolding in real time. Kelly Ryan's performance was widely regarded as one of the standout highlights of the entire weekend. Beyond everything that happened under the stage lights, the 2000 Arnold Classic gained even more historical value because of rare amateur backstage footage that later surfaced. Unlike polished broadcast coverage, this material showed the event in a raw, unfiltered way, capturing moments that fans almost never get to see. The footage followed athletes from the pump room all the way to final adjustments, tense conversations, warm-up poses, and intense expressions of focus. You could sense the psychological weight of the competition, the anxiety before stepping on stage, the pressure that only an event of that magnitude can create. It also documented prejudging, stage routines, and award ceremonies, offering a complete look at the Arnold Classic 2000 from beginning to end. That kind of behind-the-scenes access made the event feel more human. It wasn't just about extraordinary physiques. It was about real people navigating pressure, expectation, and lifelong dreams. The 2000 Arnold Classic didn't become legendary simply because of who won. It became historic because of the rare combination of elements that aligned that weekend. Peak aesthetics, genuine rivalries, strategic precision down to the smallest detail, emotional intensity that stretched from competitors to fans to the backstage corridors. It was lightning in a bottle, impossible to recreate in the exact same way. That was the night bodybuilding witnessed the absolute peak of Flex Wheeler, while unknowingly also witnessing the beginning of his quiet farewell. A singular moment where dominance and fragility existed side by side, giving that title even deeper symbolic weight. It wasn't just about winning. It was about defining an entire era with one physique, roughly 240 pounds, or 109 kilograms, of what many still call the blueprint of aesthetic perfection. The event also served as a collective coronation. Established stars proved why they belonged at the top. The women's divisions experienced structural evolution. Historic tributes connected the pioneers who built the sport to the athletes who carried it forward. It was bodybuilding looking at itself and recognizing its own legacy. More than just a competition, the 2000 Arnold Classic became a turning point in the story of modern bodybuilding. After that weekend, conversations about aesthetics versus mass, longevity, health, and legacy grew louder. Many fans and athletes still see that event as the last great moment of balance before the sport entered a new and more extreme phase. And maybe that's exactly why it's never forgotten. Because some events aren't remembered just for what happened, but for what they represented. The 2000 Arnold Classic wasn't just a battle for trophies. It was a defining chapter in bodybuilding history. So now the question is yours. In your opinion, will we ever see another event with that kind of complete, era-defining impact again?